Hi, I'm Dr. Selena Fisk, and welcome to this episode of Make Data Talk. In this podcast, I help you turn your spreadsheets into stories in a way that is practical, accessible, and hopefully a whole lot more useful than your grade 9 maths textbook. Today I'm going to be talking about data storytelling, but specifically the type of data storytelling that we do in our day-to-day work. That's either by ourselves, with our own data, and or with our teams. More often than not, we're expected to look at and use data in our regular role descriptions. We don't always have to get up and present it to others, like I talked about in my last podcast episode. This episode will give you some ideas about how you can do that, some questions to ask during that inquiry and analysis, and how to focus on what matters most. I talk to a lot of people in the work that I do, whether that be in workshops or in organisations that I go into, or people who are in the audience when I have been speaking and they come up to me and chat with me afterwards. The prevailing theme that I hear from people in these contexts is that they have so much data. There's no issues with them not having enough. They have so much and they're not necessarily sure what they need to be doing with it. And at the same time, they say to me that there is an expectation on them that they are using data to inform their decisions and to inform the work that they do and to kind of guide the actions that they're taking, and to be able to talk to their line managers and bosses and that type of thing about the way they've used data to inform their work. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is not like data storytelling where we get up and we present to an audience like a board or a client. This is where just in our day-to-day role, there's an expectation that we're using it and we want to use it. And generally, most people understand and are aware that if they can harness the power of that information and they can use it really well, then they are more likely to make better decisions and they're able to make more informed decisions than they would have without that information being readily accessible and available to them. Whenever we do an inquiry, whenever we're looking at our own data, so that might be on our own, it could be with members of our team, but kind of sitting around doing a bit of analysis and thinking about actions, I have two main questions or question prompts, I guess, that I use to guide this inquiry. The first question is always, what are the trends and insights that we can see in the data? And then the second question, but we don't want to get to the second question for a while. We need to do the first one well. But when we do get to the second question, it's now that we know that, what are we going to do about those things that are our biggest priority? So in the first instance, we're looking at trends and insights or looking for trends and insights. And then secondly, we start to think about, well, of those things, what's most important? And then what do I do with that information now that I know it? As I mentioned, I deliberately really try and decode this process. And when I do it with people or I'm in the room with them and they're going through an analysis, I get them to think really slowly and deliberately first about that first question, what are the trends and the insights? Now, trends are patterns, essentially. Trends and patterns, I use both words interchangeably. Some people might hate that, but I do. Because generally a trend is a result or metric that's performing in a way that we've expected or we've come to expect. So it's performing in quite a similar way. So it's almost like maybe plateaued or it's performing at a similar level to what it has before. It might be slowly and incrementally increasing, but we've come to expect that. So it's a pattern that doesn't surprise us. We kind of expect that was going to happen. Or equally, it could be a metric that's slowly declining and there's been maybe like a linear relationship and it's just slowly declining over time. So when we see the new metric and we know that it's dropped again, it's a pattern or a trend because it's something that we have expected to be happening. On the other hand, an insight is something that surprises us. It's something that performs in a way that I guess is different to what we had anticipated. And Gary Klein, in his book, Seeing What Others Don't, it's all about insights. And he talks about the fact that it's those things that we see in evidence or in the data that we have that really surprise us. And it's almost like the light bulb moment. So often I equate that to whenever you see a piece of data or something is shared with you at maybe a conference or in a presentation, and it's something that's really stuck with you. If it's something that you remember, a couple of days or a week later or whatever it might be, that's absolutely been an insight because it's generally changed the pattern or it surprised you enough that it's kind of stuck and it's landed. So when we're doing an analysis of data, we're looking for both of those things. We're looking for the trends and the insights, and we want people focusing on that question first and really separately from the actions. because what we don't want them doing is looking for and seeing, say, a trend or an insight, and then going down a rabbit hole about action and what they do with that information straight away. Because if they do that too quickly and too soon, they may have actually missed something that was much more important. But because they were kind of rushing into action, because we know our brains have an action bias, if they were rushing into action, then maybe they missed something else that was more important or was bigger. So maybe we end up after that first question with a whole stack of trends and insights, and obviously we can't possibly act on all of them. So there needs to be a way that we prioritize them and start to think about, well, what's more urgent and important? And I use the Eisenhower Matrix for that. Of those insights that we see, what are the highest priorities? What are the big ticket items that we really need to do something about? And it's with those trends and insights that we can start to then think about the second question, the so what? What do I now do with that information? How do I act on it now that I know that particular thing? So whether that's by ourselves or with other people, it's important to then kind of think with an open mind and with, steeped in curiosity, thinking, well, what are the possible actions that I could take? So again, rather than, jumping to the first thing we think of and settling with that, we want to really be trying to come up with multiple possible options. And a good way of doing that is thinking, even what would my colleagues suggest that we could potentially do? What have I seen work in other organisations before? What are some other options that maybe the research suggests could be good practice? And we need to kind of curate a whole host of different options for action rather than just jumping to the first one, because we want to be thinking really slowly and deliberately and making good decisions about those next steps that we take and the actions that we kind of embrace rather than just kind of latching onto the first thing that we think about. The really nice thing about these two questions is that it can be an individual sport or it can be a team sport. And having other people and other brains with you is only going to ideally enhance the process and enhance the findings and the analysis that you do and enhance the list of possible options and actions. What we know about looking for trends and insights in the data and what we also know about choosing actions and thinking about how we respond to the given information is that what we choose and what we see and what we think about are hugely impacted by our backgrounds, biases, cultures, experiences, mood. There are so many different factors that contribute to what we see, and how we think and how we intend to act. And so in a perfect world, we'd actually be doing the analysis, the first part, so looking at the data, looking for trends and insights. We'd be bouncing those ideas off other people. And we would also be tapping into them during the conversation about potential actions. Now, that's obviously quite time consuming, and that doesn't have to happen with all of a team or a group of people in the room together. They don't have to be engaging in the analysis at the same time. And often, to be honest, if they do that, it's quite hard because, people ask questions and they start talking and then other people get frustrated because they're trying to concentrate and all of that. But one of the really good ways of doing that is to give the parameters of the analysis to the people beforehand, before the meeting time, and just say, look, we want you to come to this meeting with kind of maybe your top 5 trends and insights that you've identified across these data sets, because we're going to be talking about what our biggest priorities are and therefore what our possible actions are going to be. And then it gives people time and space to kind of do the analysis when it's right for them and without other people around. But then they're kind of coming back with a bit of a short list. So they've already prioritised their, say, top 5, and you can curate the list and talk about it as a group. And because of all of those different factors that influence our analysis, what you'll see is that everybody who shows up at that meeting, they're not all going to agree on the top 5 things that are most important. They'll have some different things. There'll certainly be some similarities, but they'll have different things. They'll have things in different orders. And actually, there's so much value in fleshing out those differences and those kind of changes across the different people to unpack why it is that they value or prioritize one thing over another. The exact same thing is true then for actions. So you could either brainstorm that in a room together once you've decided on the most important trends and insights. Or after that first bit, that could be a relatively short catch up. You then send people away with the top 5 insights or the top 3 insights that you've come up with, and then get people to think about, okay, well, what are some actions? How do we address this? What do we do? How do we kind of tackle it as a team? What do those next steps look like? So historically, what we used to do was we used to kind of tell people what to see in the data, and we've learned better than that now. So that's not what we do. We actually have realized and recognized that we need to be tapping into these multiple perspectives, multiple experiences, and our analysis and our actions and the doing that comes from the data is just so much more effective and so much more likely to land when we tap into a range of perspectives and people from our team. So as always, thanks for joining us on this episode of Make Data Talk. This was the second episode about data storytelling. So the last week's episode looked at data storytelling to an audience, and this one was about data storytelling with your own data and with members of your team. So feel free to go and have a listen to that one if you haven't heard it already. But if you are finding any of this content useful, I'd really appreciate any likes and comments on any of the podcast platforms that you're listening to this from. And also, feel free to share it with anybody that you work with that you think might find it useful. As always, stay safe and take care of yourself. Bye.